Hello. It's the 8th of December, 2017, and this is episode 84 of the Unseen Podcast. This is your host, Paul Carr, and with us tonight are Patrick Festa.
Hello, hello.
And Sam Lichtenstein.
Hi.
And Nick Nielsen.
Hello, Paul, and hello, listeners.
We were hoping to get Ken Wiesian as well. Ken's having some technical difficulties. Hopefully he'll pop up later. I can't guarantee that. So anyway, stay tuned. But anyway, we had a lot of different ideas floating around our pre-show discussion where we try to set the topic, or at least what I call the seed topic for the discussion. As you know, our discussions tend to wander around a little bit and lose focus, and that's just fine. That's kind of the way my brain works anyway. So let's start with one of the seed topics, which in October, a group called METI International, or METI.org, in conjunction with a Spanish music festival, I'm not making this up, used a very powerful radar transmitter in Norway to transmit a message to a very nearby star, which is known to have planets in its habitable zone. This message was constructed so that it would make it possible for the receiver to gradually build up understanding of what it is we were trying to transmit. And they're also sending clips of music from the music festival. And in April, they plan to send more. So, I don't know. Who thinks that was a bad idea? Anybody? Okay, so it was a good idea. Why was it a good idea? Let's start with you, Patrick.
I was going to say, I don't know if it's bad or good. It's just a little weird. I mean, I'm not sure how it works. I'm not sure how they explain what the message is about, or how to do anything with it. But I don't think it's a bad idea. I mean, there's people out there that think, oh no, they're going to come and invade us now. If they had that capability, they would have done it already.
Right. Okay. That's basically Doug Vakoch, by the way, is the president of METI International. He used to be with the SETI Institute, and not too long ago he went off to start up the METI organization. METI means Messaging to Extraterrestrial Intelligence. They also call it Active SETI. So,
what star was it, by the way?
GJ273b, which is actually quite nearby, and it's a very dim red dwarf, and it has at least two planets, one of which is in the habitable zone. We don't know there's any life on it, of course. That's something that is that whole question of habitability is being batted around quite vigorously these days. But the thought is, if there's somebody there, we'd like to send them a message. And the message we want to send them is, we're a dancing species.
How far away is it?
About 12 light years?
12.4 light years.
Yeah, not far at all. In terms of cosmic scales.
12 and a half years, we'll be able to decipher whether or not there's any life there anyway.
In about 25 years would be the first possible reply. Yeah.
Right. And didn't Doug say in his interview with you, Paul, that they encoded a scheduled next message in 25 years?
They will. Well, no. What they're doing is the message.
The next transmission is going to work its way up to some sort of calendar type.
Right. The one in April will have more detail, but essentially, what they want to do is hope that somebody receives and then be listening in 25 years. Now, both Doug and I will be quite elderly then, but
well, I was going to say, the thing is, in 10 years from now, we'll be better equipped to find out whether there's life around certain planets anyway. So I'm not so sure if it was a waste of energy or, just a shot in the dark kind of thing.
It was kind of a shot in the dark, but if you look at the videos that they did with this music festival, they had all these musicians come on and talk about why they participated and what they thought it was about. And for them, it was, and I'm sure you're all familiar with Daniela DePaulis's work, which is kind of along similar lines. She's not a musician, but she's been sending brain waves into space. Now she doesn't have a nearby star targeted. She just transmits them from a radio telescope in the Netherlands. And I think they just point it straight up and transmit. But so there's a certain amount of art here, performance art, and it's not the craziest performance art idea I've ever heard. not by a long shot. Probably a lot of people remember when John and Oko did the bed piece, right, where they were lying in bed and and they brought the press up there and said, "We're in bed and we want to promote peace in the world." And that Yoko saw that as performance art.
Yoko sees everything as performance art.
Almost. Well, you live in New York, Sam. You probably see.
Yeah.
Performance art is part of their daily experience, but.
So I guess in terms of whether this was a good idea or not, I am inclined to trust this post that Greg Benford made today on the Centauri Dreams blog, where he says it's a nothing burger because it's not detectable by a civilization with our or worse than our level of radio telescope technology. Now, I don't have the expertise to evaluate Benford's claims about the nature of the transmission, but his name is Benford, so I'm inclined to trust him on this sort of topic. But
well, he does have a lot of knowledge, but did you say worse than our level of technology?
Well, so he says, of course, you can always assume if it's like a Type 3 civilization or something, maybe they have much more sensitive.
Well, you don't have to be a Type 3 civilization,
even a Type 1 civilization. Yeah. But
you just have to have a big radio telescope in a radio quiet area, like on the backside of our moon.
Right, but we've seen nothing from them, right? And they're not that far away, so.
Well,
the odds that they're
but we're not monitoring them very often, hardly at all, and B, they may not be motivated to send a signal, so.
Or they may dance to it and then forget about it.
They may have a party and they say, okay, what were we talking about now? In other words, they're all like me. But
so you guys are not convinced that if they could receive this a priori, they probably would have leakage detectable by us, or your actual point is detectable doesn't mean detected because
if they had,
it's not comprehensive enough.
If they had a radio telescope like we have, they could detect it. If they have, but we've only been doing radio astronomy for about 70 years.
Well, so Benford claims that they could detect the energy, but not actually, listen to the signal.
Well, okay, that's in dispute.
Right, it's a bit of a nitpick and probably relies on sort of details of the technical analysis that Vakoch and people.
The radio astronomer in Spain thought, if they have something comparable to Green Bank,
Arecibo,
Arecibo, they could actually detect a signal.
Well, yeah, of course. Sam is
it's
right.
Not a high bit rate. It's a low bit rate. So
I think what Sam is pointing out is that they'd have to be listening. First of all, they have to have their own SETI, so to speak. Listening for signals.
They'd have to be listening. Yes.
I mean, what are the chances of that?
Well, that's why they sent it 3 times, and which is all they could really do. But and as Jill Tarter pointed out, every single METI effort is a shot in the dark because you don't know A, that they'll be listening and or B, that they're even there, right? So
But I think we can regard this as if we regard METI as a science, we can call a project like this an aspirational science. We're trying to, develop capacities that might someday be meaningful, although now it's not much more than a stunt.
It is reasonably defined as an experiment in Active SETI. I mean, the question. Okay, if I send a message, well, do I get a response? Right.
I mean, no one before ocean-faring vessels existed, nobody really regarded tossing messages in ancient Roman wine casks off the Atlantic coast of Spain as a scientific experiment to detect life in North America, right? I mean,
well, that's true, but why is that analogous?
It's not so disanalogous, I think.
I suppose
I think it's quite a good analogy.
I suppose it's a practical practice. Say they're trying while they're still trying to find out if there's any life out there. They want to practice sending messages, and this might be their first try. Let's try this, and whether or not we actually expect a response in 25 years or not. We're testing out our ways of doing things. I suppose it's something like that could be considered as a.
Well, yeah, I mean that is part of it. I mean, it is baby steps, right? The notion that let's start,
decades.
But there's a definite strategy here, right? Start with nearby stars that are known to have habitable planets, and by the way, that population
planets in habitable zones, yeah.
That right, inhabitable zones. That population will increase dramatically over the next 10 years because of the new missions.
It will. There will be more planets discovered, but the criteria will probably narrow down.
Not as much as there will be new planets discovered. I think.
If we get instruments that are capable of refining exoplanet atmospheres, and we start deciding only ones with oxygen count, then.
Well, I don't know about that, but I mean, there's certainly. I mean, in terms of what tests will do for us, nearby Earths and super Earths, and then Plato, which is the European mission, is a few years behind that, which is sun-like stars.
But like Sam said, we're going to have the capacity within the next few decades. Maybe it's 20, 30 years out, but still, within 50 years, if we keep spending money on any kind of space science, we're going to be able to do spectroscopy of exoplanet atmosphere, and we're going to figure out, probably have a much better idea of what constitutes a biosignature, and hopefully also what constitutes a technosignature. So if we could find another planet out there with industrial pollution in its atmosphere, that would obviously be a priority target. And then the second rank of priorities would be those where we could be, pretty darn near certain that there was biology brewing on a planet, even if we couldn't sense any industrial pollution in the atmosphere.
Yeah, so that's still pretty controversial how well you can do that, but yeah.
Yeah, well, it's controversial now, but I think, like I said, in the coming decades, both the conceptual framework and the experimental framework will become much more solid as we get more sensitive instruments and astrobiology becomes more mature as a science.
All right. Well, right now we're in the sort of prospecting phase. That is, missions like Kepler, and then TESS and Plato. TESS and Plato will both focus on much more nearby stars than Kepler did.
What about the James Webb?
When?
The James Webb.
James Webb.
Well, James Webb will be more like for the follow-up. It won't discover a lot of planets, but it will be able to get very sensitive data once they're discovered. The whole idea of both TESS and Plato is to serve as the prospectors for follow-up, not only with JWST, but with these enormous telescopes that are coming online on the ground in both in the northern
30-meter telescope in Hawaii.
Yeah, the TMT plus the new ones that are coming online in that are sponsored by the European Southern Observatory. Big telescopes, and they can gather a lot of light, which is what you need to do spectra. And the they can actually, in some ways, can outperform James Webb Space Telescope. Where James Webb will excel is in the infrared.
Right. Well, with adaptive optics and the enormous size of telescopes we can build on the ground, yeah, they can even outperform space-based telescopes until we build a really big space-based array.
Well, space-based telescopes have advantages, but ground-based have raced ahead in some areas. So it's going to be kind of a complementary capability.
When is TESS going up? Is it going up before?
TESS is supposed to go up next year. It should be up. Well, they're saying no earlier than March of 2018.
Oh, so it's
about 4 months from now.
Almost around the same time as the other one.
But it might be a little later than that. It might be more like April, May, something like that.
They moved up the JWST, I think, to October. I think
moved it up. No, they pushed it back.
Pushed it back.
Yeah, it's not going to go in 2018, almost certainly.
Really?
Yeah. But that's okay. You want them to take their time and get it right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because it's a non-serviceable unit until we get other vehicles.
It's going to be way the hell out there.
Which one? TESS?
No, JWST.
Oh yeah.
But JWST planets are only a small part of its. I shouldn't say a small part. They're only one part of its science justification. They're looking at a lot of other stuff. So
yeah, they're looking deeper into space. They're looking at the beginning of the universe, kind of thing.
Yeah, well, that's one thing they can do with JWST is they can look, because it's an infrared telescope. They can look into deep, and because they can expose it for extremely long time frames.
Yeah, and it's specifically designed to look into the much lower infrared, much deeper infrared than Hubble was.
Oh yeah, Hubble, and much deeper than any ground-based telescope can, and it can. It will be able to see galaxies that are very near the early, probably the very, very first galaxies, and that's going to be exciting, and that's going to be get a lot of attention early on. They do have a mission to look at planetary data and to study planets, and as you probably know, there was a recent announcement about what the early science projects are. I posted that. I can put in the show notes. It's a number of different things, including some exoplanet work. So it's
and it's the perfect instrument to search for Dyson spheres.
It is if they're not very far away. In fact, I talked with Duncan Forgan about searching for debris disks that were from asteroid mining, and he said, "Well, if it's close, we might be able to see it. However, we wouldn't. It would be very tough to distinguish it from a natural debris disk. So you kind of have.
Would asteroid mining generate infrared excess from the waste heat from the mining?
Yes, if you do enough. If you do enough mining over a short enough period of time, yeah, there will be debris.
I assume, Nick, is that what you had in mind, was that infrared is the natural wavelength to look for the heat signature of a Dyson sphere?
Well, that was the original point of Dyson's paper, where he introduced the ideas, is how can we look for alien civilizations that aren't transmitting to us? And he suggests the possibility of Dyson sphere, which would, whether or not they're transmitting to us, we would be able to detect the infrared from the waste heat.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a very good mental lens. It's not, it's improbable that anybody would build such a thing, but in my view, but
no, I agree.
Because it's kind of a little bit
such a thing.
Well,
nobody thinks there's going to be an eggshell around the star.
No, but it would have to be a very, very highly hierarchically controlled sort of
I mean,
beast.
If you were to go Futurama, get frozen, wake up in 3017, wouldn't you be a little disappointed if we weren't harvesting at least a small percentage of the sun's light with
Well, we
a
are
vast-
already harvesting a small percentage of this.
No, with a much bigger percentage than that. You know.
Yeah,
I'm
but I mean,
talking-
I think the notion of that she would block enough of it to have an observable IR signature runs into a lot of issues, and
There may not be enough material on a planet, on any single planet.
well,
to
no,
build.
you actually that's been studied.
Well,
You could break up a planet the size of Mercury and make a pretty substantial dent in a Dyson swarm.
in one of Dyson's latest papers, he actually wrote about meth planets.
Yeah, you could actually the material's not a problem. It's the incredible level of sort of command structure you have to have. It's very Stalinist. I just it just strikes me as well. Okay, if it's your home planet, it is. If it's some other star that doesn't have any inhabitants, like for example, we talked about this with Tabby Star, a relatively young star that probably doesn't have any life evolved around it, and probably won't live long enough, won't survive long enough to see that kind of thing. There you might want to build you could perceivably have like a private company that would come and just harvest the energy from it. And
I don't see what the problem is. Like, if we were to do it in the solar system, just set up your swarm, orbiting mostly outside the plane of the ecliptic. It's not going to obstruct anything for Earth or even our Mars colony. It won't be our problem.
Well,
just out there, they're just beaming the power to our heliocentric orbit.
Well, but the problem is if you really start to scale it up and make it really big, you get into traffic issues. You get into, big enough to create a real IR excess, a significant one.
So you wouldn't see anything if you just were harvesting single-digit percent.
Well, single-digit percent you could probably see.
But you think already then it's massive enough that
certainly on a bright F star like Tabby Star, you would certainly see that. But because you have that's a lot of energy to move from the visible into the infrared. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we're not seeing that in Tabby Star is a strong argument against there being a Dyson sphere there.
Would the underside of a ring world emit IR signature?
Well, probably, unless the geometry is exactly right, which doesn't make any sense. No, because a ring world would have enormous amounts of material, and we're not seeing anything like that. We're seeing, you'd probably be able to see it unless it were exactly edge on, and there was some kind of thermal control mechanism that radiated the heat, all the heat perpendicular to the ring. There's a lot of engineering issues
which might be
ring
reasonable.
worlds, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, you have to do something with the heat, right? So
I think in the second Ring World books that they talk about seeing that under the ocean areas that they have big heat radiators because somebody had written to Larry Niven and told him, no, you got to get rid of some of the waste heat. So,
you do. I mean,
and the spillway mountains were also the result of input after the fact.
Well, those radiators have to point in some direction. The odds that they're going to point so that you can't see any of them is pretty unlikely. I mean, there's it's entirely possible there's one out there that we just haven't observed yet because we don't have the right instruments on it.
Well, yeah, I mean, even a ring around a star is a unimaginable undertaking. Forget about a sphere.
Yeah, well, I don't like the ring worlds either because again they're so top down.
Now, of course, one reason why you might not see the waste heat is if they're careful to point it away from us.
Why would they do that? I mean, to point it away from us, they had to point at everybody else, right? Why do they care what we see?
Well, if there's only two of us and they're only worried about us,
Right.
this gets us back to the METI issue.
I can tell you they had nothing to worry about.
Right now, but 1,000 years from now might be a different story. And if you're building a ring world, you're thinking on 1,000-year timescales, or you should be, unless your general contractor is incredible.
Your general contractor is probably ripping you off.
Well, of course they get cost overruns, but that
well,
goes with the job of
the notion that
multi-trillion-dollar
people do things
project.
because it's taking one for the team on a regular basis. It just doesn't happen. I think that what we'd have is again, anything that's that top down that requires that much hierarchy, I just don't think will happen on a big scale. I mean,
well, what about
it's too Soviet.
Did you read Neil Stephenson's novel Seven Eves?
No.
So in that, the premise for that is that if you blow up the moon, Earth gets an accretion, a ring of debris, and it just is organically built by. Of course, this causes the rain of hellfire onto Earth, so humanity takes refuge in low Earth orbit, and eventually they settle the ring of debris, and it just naturally build it into sort of like a ring world, which is just a bunch of asteroids sort of connected to each other over time, some of which are actually connected, some of which aren't. But it's essentially an approach to an organic, non-top-down construct of a orbital superstructure.
Yeah,
except for the top destroying the moon.
Well, that's just an accident.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant it was an intentional destruction of the moon.
I forget what the reason is. It was. I think it's just an accident, if I remember the book correctly. But
isn't that also in the Time Machine? Isn't when the guy comes back to the relatively near future that the moon is destroyed?
The moon is destroyed. We're in a lot of trouble.
No, I don't think it was in a time machine.
Well, I thought it was.
He goes way into the future where the sun is starting to expand.
At the very end, he goes way to the future, and there's a little thing flopping around on the beach, which he realizes was what's left of terrestrial life. I thought there was a nearer, but long before the Elox and the Morlai, and they come long before the last scene of the on the beach with the big red sun and the thing flopping around on the sand.
I don't know. Now I have to reread the damn thing.
But so
read the last chapter is just great. I reread it recently.
What I was trying to get at, though, are any of you sympathetic, to return briefly to the METI question, to these X-risk considerations, or nervous? I mean, pretty much nobody spoke up when Paul asked if they thought the METI was a bad idea, and I get it's very difficult to get me excited about any of these existential risk type questions, but. Many people, smart people, disagree with me about a lot of them. So maybe I should be giving more weight to such concerns than I do.
Yeah,
I have my own existential risk preoccupations, but METI isn't one of them. If we lived in an intelligence-dense universe, then it would be a really big problem. But we would have known that the first time we put up a radio telescope, and then we just got bombarded with signals from every quarter. And then we knew that the universe was full of technological civilizations, and they were out there and they could get us. Then it'd be concerned, but
Right.
There's no sign that that's the case.
Right. And even if they were out there, if they were the communicating type of people or beings, they would have tried to communicate with us anyway. And if they're the quiet type and they don't want, they're secretive and they want to take over the world, that kind of thing. And if they were there, if they had that technology, they would have done it. So no matter which way you look at it,
they might be on their way. They saw I Love Lucy and took off 180 light years away. It's just a matter of time till they get here.
Yeah, but
they're coming to serve man, so don't worry about it.
Well, actually, they haven't gotten I Love Lucy. They haven't gotten I Love Lucy yet, so they're just waiting.
That's why that zone will never go away. To serve man as a cookbook.
Well, no, I that that is to me, the objection to the existential risk is that there's no rational reason to attack us or to try to steal anything that we have that would require the resources of crossing interstellar distances.
Yeah, I'm
The
saying,
only
why-
risk there is that if there is something we've overlooked in physics, and there is an easy way to do that we don't know about, so that crossing interstellar distances is like getting on an airplane in their economic reckoning, then we might have an issue, because then they say, well, we'll come.
Right.
We want all your Beatles butcher covers, and we want them now.
Yeah.
But what
have
if carbon-based life is just a rare culinary delicacy for them?
In the meantime, they have to obey the laws of physics like we do, because there's
Well, but I mean, yeah, we think we know what the laws of physics are. We have a pretty good confidence in that, but we can't sign up to 100% certainty on that.
Yeah, there really is no warp drive,
Well,
we
there
don't know
could be
that.
a warp drive, but we just have no idea how to implement it. But in 1,000 years, maybe we'd figure it out.
Well, in 1,000 years from now, Gandhar was destroyed, but in 1,000 years ago, it was saved.
Yeah, but I mean,
That was
the timescales vary depending on what kind of stability you're looking at. I mean,
that was a little joke that came from the science fiction animated movie called Light Years.
yeah. Well, I
They
mean,
went back in time and saved Gandhar.
I think it'll probably be something like an infinite improbability drive, but
Yeah, that would be that I like.
that
I love that.
just well, it's just ridiculously improbable that I could go from here to there several light years away. So I'll just create a drive that makes the ridiculously improbable probable, and then problem solved.
You got to be careful not to have any whales falling.
You have to have a really nice hot cup of tea, I understand. But that's it's a fantasy, but as far as we know, there's the energetic cost of getting from any place in the galaxy to any other place is extremely high, and therefore the amount of free energy you can harvest from coming here is it's a losing proposition.
But there's more to life than money or energy, Like I said, what if we just taste really good to the aliens?
It would have to be really, really good.
Or they have a taste for conquest, just for the sake of subjugating and enslaving populations of other worlds, because that's fun to do,
But isn't there, even in conquest, there's always some kind of profit to be made, right? I mean, it's not.
Well, it could be ideological motivation, like a proselytization, if they're sort of
forcing us into an alien religion.
I mean, when the Spaniards went to the New World, they wanted to spread their religion, but mostly they were looking for gold.
That's right. Yeah.
What happened in Avatar? The religion was real. The planet really was a spirit.
Now, I will stipulate that any sufficiently advanced technology is a species without religion, but
controversial.
I could be wrong.
Well, I happen to follow that too.
And nobody can prove me wrong, because we don't know that we don't have any evidence of another species like that. But
you'd have to be invest a little bit of effort into defining what you mean by religion, because this is not something that there is any degree of consensus about.
Well, I'm kind of influenced by what's his name? The book Religion Explained. Can't remember his name.
Dan Dennett.
No, a French guy. Anyway, he goes into it. It's basically his hypothesis, which I think is quite plausible, is that it's sort of a bug in human evolution.
Pascal Boyer.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, that's sort of similar to Stevenson's hypothesis from Snow Crash, which is that it's a sort of operating system virus that was introduced back in Mesopotamia. We never really got over it.
Yeah, but viral types of invasions are almost probably going to exist in some form or another forever, right? I mean,
if we can go much older than that. If we take the evidence of the the painted caves of Europe during the last ice age, and figures like the Lion Man and other carvings that have been made. We don't have any textual evidence from the period. Most people think that these were ritual or had some relationship to a religion. And then there's some controversial remains of whether or not Neanderthals engaged in ritual burial. So there's disagreement on it. We've got the material culture, but we don't have anything else. So we don't know exactly how to interpret this stuff. So they may have just had fun painting animals on the walls of the caves, or it may have had a profound a form of magic where if you paint the animal, you're more likely to kill it when you go hunting the next time.
Well, yeah, magical thinking is one of those things that comes about in Boyer's way of thinking about things. I mean, when you look at religion broadly, not just in terms of the Abrahamic religions, but in terms of religions everywhere in the world, and it is a cultural universal, you have them everywhere. But a lot of those religions are much more focused on day-to-day life, right? They don't care about the big cosmic questions. It's the small gods that inhabit the trees and the rocks and the animals and the weather and all that stuff. So a lot of it is, and Boyer would say it's a result of the social brain, the way it evolved, that we have to tell these stories, these fictions, in order to organize our efforts. And maybe he's right. I know Yuval Harari thinks that we basically survive with our fictions.
But it's really not that helpful to try to make one category of religion, because you could get into all kinds of problems like, is Confucianism a religion? Or is it a moral and ethical system? Is the folk religion?
Yeah, sure. But I think Paul's point stands nonetheless, which is that regardless of how you count Confucianism, it clearly scratches some itch, and that itch could be a contingent feature of our cognitive evolution, right? The sort of, for example, Confucian ethics is an ethical system, right? And
it's an incredibly successful system for the organization of imperial China. Everybody, for thousands of years, you had to take a test on Confucian philosophy if you wanted to be a member of the imperial bureaucracy, and that had an incredible. They lent an incredible stability to Chinese imperial civilization.
Right, but I guess my point was that all ethical. There's a fair amount of universalism to things that are sort of in the vague circle of religious stuff, and that universalism could either be for some sort of evolutionary psychology reason that it's actually adaptive, or it could be sort of an epiphenomenon that other aspects of our cognition made us gravitate towards certain types of ethical systems, religious instincts, things like that. And all of that, whatever it is, could just be a sort of a contingent feature of our own evolutionary history. And so I guess it's not clear which way this points towards Paul's question, whether some alternative form of religion in an alien civilization would be compatible with a sort of super civilizational level of technology.
We do know that there are religions in our world that have a very strong drive to replicate themselves in the minds of other people, right? Christianity would be one of them. Other religions, not so much. Judaism is not that. They're not big on proselytizing.
To me, religion is it's metaphysical. Anything that has to do with a god or more than one god, it's a spiritual thing. Whereas I don't think Confucianism is. It's just a sort of a
there's
a act, morals or logical thinking or something like that. Like
science, you can't draw a perfectly clear line between Chinese folk religion and Confucianism. There is a line to be drawn, but it's not perfectly clear. And similarly, in Japan, you've got the native Shinto tradition, which is like a folk religion that has developed right alongside Buddhism, which is an import from India, and they both serve different sectors of the population. They both serve different needs of the human psyche. I don't disagree with anything Sam said about, and I would strongly agree that there are evolutionary psychology mechanisms to explain most of this stuff, but I don't think it's helpful to put it in one category, because the kind of magic probably associated with cave paintings involved in hunting rituals is very different from the kind of Confucian moral system used in imperial China, and that's in turn very different from
My impression,
Abrahamic religions.
my impression of the cave paintings, for example, is literally early art. Painting.
There was no, but there was no distinction at that time between art, philosophy, hunting, science, religion. There were because even 2,000 years ago, we didn't really have the clear distinctions we have today between the different aspects of human life.
Well, I mean, but like 100,000 years ago, the cavemen, they are men, they are humanoid, at least.
I would think it's reasonable to say they were human.
Well, they were anatomically human. There's no question about that.
Well, there's been a lot of evolution since then, but
what I've seen on
same species.
Yeah. What I've seen on cave paintings about the animals and stuff, I don't think there was any metaphysical thing. Although they did have some paintings that were image the sun and different weird kind of like perhaps that was a religious sort of thing. But I don't know. But in any case, I get accused. The atheists get accused of having their own religion. Like atheism is a religion too. No, it's not. It's the lack thereof. So that's why I get a little iffy on the subject. When somebody says religion to me, I'm immediately thinking God or gods. Or some.
What I'm suggesting is that you should not think that way. That you should look at the totality of human experience that's been associated with religion, and it's extremely diverse. People who have personal mystic trances but have no relationship to institutionalized religion are very different from the kind of individuals who have never had a religious experience but whose life is completely regimented by a religious doctrine. And so the diversity of human experience, I think, needs to be respected.
Yeah, but I mean, does the word religion then mean nothing?
No, I think it means something, but I don't think we can say yet. I don't think the scholarship.
Or does it mean many inconsistent things? Or
so you don't think it's possible that there was one, one caveman 150,000 years ago who introduced the religion meme, and it's just before the migration out of Africa, maybe it's all an outgrowth of a single mimetic origin, replicating and following various diverse pathways towards reproduction.
I won't say that that's impossible. It's a very fun idea, but that wouldn't be how I would tell the story.
Yeah,
of human origin.
We don't know. We'd have to recognize we'll just never know. But
yeah, I think from the moment thought occurs, and that's not just human thought. It's any animal thinking. With the brain. I think from the first spark of thought, there's wondering, especially if you're an intelligent animal, how things work or where you came from and things like that. And I don't think there's any line at any point at which you can say, "Oh, let's start a religion," and then all of a sudden it was there. I think it started from the first thought.
I completely agree with Patrick on that point.
Religions are very bottom up, but
you don't think this is amenable to scientific investigation by trying to develop a better understanding of animal psychology? Like, if you could show that dolphins have something similar to religion, that would seem informative on this set of questions.
It would. I mean, well, I would start with a simpler question: do dolphins tell each other stories? And
I wouldn't be surprised at all. Right?
And are any of those stories fictional? Because I really think religion is sort of a very high metastable version of telling fictional stories to each other. That allows our social networks to stabilize.
Well, I've always said that the Bible is nothing but an anthology of old stories put together.
Well, I mean, but the the Bible is a complicated. I mean, there's no one Bible for one thing.
Right, but I mean, the origins of the various versions of the Bible
you believe me, I've lived in the Deep South. I know people that drive around with bumper stickers saying, "If it ain't King James, it ain't Bible."
whatever.
Which kind
Still a
of
book of stories from
neglects the fact that none of the Bible is written in English, ever written in English. But
Nevertheless, that says something very important about the Anglo-American tradition.
yeah,
That's what I mean. It was at face value. It is an anthology of stories from various writers.
That's
through
true.
hundreds
It
of years.
is.
oh, and not only that, but we don't have any of the original manuscripts, so it's actually copies of
But we do have
copies
some
of copies.
we do have fragments of some very early manuscripts, back to about 400 AD, more or less, and that's pretty darn early.
And from the Old Testament, we go back earlier than that, but
right.
And we have some contemporaneous records from Egypt, right, and various,
papyrus. Yes, papyrus from Egyptian tombs,
or even stone inscriptions, right, from certain.
Yeah, but I mean, it's pretty fragmented. It's not.
I'm just saying you can corroborate some of the historical aspects of
a little bit. But I mean, a lot of it, if you go back, you go into the more mystical parts of the Bible, a lot of that's just oral tradition that got written down at some point.
I'd like to mention John Romer, who is a famous Egyptologist, did a great series, a television series on the Bible called Testament. I recently bought it from Amazon. I've watched it through about 3 or 4 times. It's great. It's a great history of the Bible. And he makes an observation in that story in one of the episodes saying, the Bible isn't history, it's a history of belief. And I think that's a really good way to think about it. It's wrong-headed. People have a natural desire to try to tally it with actual things, but if you think of it as a history of belief, that makes it much more direct.
Yeah, it makes it academic, which is what it really should be. Whereas the Christians call it, or the ones that call it history.
Well, most people who are believers have, when they ask what the Bible is, they'll hold up a little book to say, "This is my Bible." But if you go to a scholar, what's the Bible? He's got multiple shelves full of different Greek texts, which are many of which are inconsistent with each other, and plus a lot of other stuff that didn't make it into the canon. Right,
but on the face value, on the simplistic version, what Nick is saying is absolutely right. In other words, the Bible or any religious text is not history.
No,
but deeply rooted Christians or religious people will swear that it is, because this is written right there. This is what happened. This is his word. And this is not true.
Oh, look, I grew up with that. I
learned a great piece of biblical history recently. You might like this, Patrick. So the Christian Bible has this concept of Armageddon. Do you know the etymology of that? It refers to a city named Megiddo. So I think the R prefix, people call the city of Raqqa in Syria Ar-Raqqa. It's like a standard prefix in the sort of Levantine languages.
Isn't it a definite article?
Yeah, it might be a definite article. I'm not sure. Anyway, so Megiddo is a city, and the reason why it's famous in history is that basically there was this pharaoh, Thutmose III, who totally kicked ass, and he just conquered everybody, and he smashed the Canaanite forces at Megiddo in 1450 BC. And we know this because he inscribed his victories on these obelisks. And then later on, the one reason this is personal interest is that eventually in the 1800s, it became fashionable for the cities in Europe to have obelisks that, of course, they call Cleopatra's Needle because she's the only famous Egyptian. So London and Paris both had Cleopatra's Needle. So New York was like, we want one. And today in Central Park, we have Thutmose III's obelisk that commemorates some of his victories, maybe or maybe not, including at Armageddon.
That's interesting.
Al-Megiddo, yes. Very good.
But I'm going to stick with Nick's version. It is a history of belief, not actual history, unless you're talking about a specific album.
It's what most Christians would call the Bible is a specifically selected version of books, right?
Yeah.
That
It's
To
actually
bring this
ridiculous.
back to bring this back to METI, how do you think people would respond if somebody transmitted the text of the Bible to some other star? What kind of splash would that make in the
Yeah.
media?
well, it would probably be interpreted as gibberish unless we
Then we would
preceded
have
that
the
with a whole lot of more information.
Then we would have the invasion. They would get scared of what is this civilization out there with warlike creatures? We got to get rid of them.
Well, they'd be probably worried about the deities.
But do you think this would involve people, and people who would otherwise be uninterested in METI might get interested, whether they're for or against? Or do you think people would those kind of people wouldn't notice anyway?
There's also the theory, of course, that the gods, in ancient Mesopotamia were aliens, right? I mean,
If you want to honor that with the word theory.
Yeah, I don't want to call that a theory. That's more like a clickbait.
Ancient aliens now. How did this turn into ancient aliens?
well, once they finished building the pyramids, they decided they wanted a bunch of followers.
Well, there is this tendency that people have when they read weird things in ancient literature. They assume that the people couldn't have been imaginative or constructed complex narratives that were fictional back in those days, like we can now.
Yeah.
And of course they could.
Impossible. We were too stupid.
So,
We're much smarter than they are.
I've seen this also in Native American lore, where they had all these stories about various animals and creation myths and so forth. A lot of fun stuff. And a lot of people say, well, that's got to have some literal interpretation of something that really happened and with aliens from outer space or something. And no, give them credit. They just made it up. It was their art. It was their mythology,
Right.
And the Greek gods don't have to have a real analog, and the Norse gods don't have to either. I mean, it's just,
one of the native tribes of North America called the Milky Way the pollen path. I love that phrase.
that which probably makes more sense if you don't have dairy.
I never heard that.
Yeah.
The pollen path, yeah.
And in the old days, people could actually see the Milky Way.
Yes, before electric lights and all the rest of it.
They had dark nights. They could see things like that. These days, you got to find a mountaintop and go to it on a moonless night to see it. But
you're in. Are you in Portland, Nick, or Salem?
Yeah, I'm in Portland.
Well, maybe Portland, you have too much light pollution, but certainly parts of Oregon.
In rural Oregon, where my mom lives, I can, if it's a clear night, I've seen the Milky Way there, but I can't see it from Portland.
Oh yeah, well here in the DC suburbs, forget it. You might see about 20 stars.
Yeah. Sometimes it gets so bad here that you can just about make out Orion, which is like the brightest and biggest damn.
I can make out Orion, and I can make out the other bright constellations, and I know it's a really good night when I can see Sagittarius. That's that's a few times a year. So
I wrote a blog post once in which I said that the stage of our history when we most need to be conscious of the stars and our place in the universe is the time when our technology has made it a very marginal experience compared to our ancestors. Those cave people painting caves 30, 40,000 years ago, they would have had an incredible view of the night sky.
Absolutely. And I venture to say to the people that think that we're smarter now, I would say that they were smarter then. Without the electric.
But we have our knowledge is better organized, but they had experiences that we don't have.
That's absolutely right.
Well, also we have telescopes that they didn't have.
That's right. We have scientific instruments. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Except that those who got to look through the scientific instruments and the spaceships did our ancestors in ancient alien scenarios, then they got it all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. If you don't find Giorgio Tsoukalos convincing, I don't know what I can do for you.
Getting back to METI.
Yeah, well, okay. But we got off on religion because we wanted to ask the question, would someone out there have not only a religion, but have a religion that would make them want to aggressively propagate it to other species. And we certainly lots of science fiction stories about that.
Or to avoid it.
Well, I would then say with the pun, heaven help us.
Or in Douglas Adams' novel, these people discover that the existence of the galaxy for the first time, and they decide they have to destroy the whole thing because it conflicts with a religion, right? I mean, they look at it and they go, "It's magnificent, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, it has to go." And so they start trying to conquer the galaxy, and there's this massive war. And the cricket planet is what it's called. And of course, that's all a massive joke, but I don't think he was entirely joking about the nature of religion. But anyway,
well, some of the most important truths are told to us by jokes. And you find that in Douglas Adams all the time.
Oh yeah, I'm still mining great stuff out of Adams after all these years.
Yeah, he's just the gift that keeps giving. The guy was so smart.
He was a good friend of Richard Dawkins.
Is that right?
Yeah. In fact, he introduced Richard Dawkins to his current wife.
I didn't know that.
I think you've mentioned that before.
Yeah, I probably have.
Favorite piece of trivia, no doubt.
And there's a little tribute to him in the God Delusion. But
another one I have to read. I have it.
The thing that Adams we actually did with the Wow Signal, we did a whole series, a whole episode on Douglas Adams. But anyway, the question is, would there be could that motivate an ET to come and try to just take us over, to establish their caliphate over us?
Yeah, and so I think most of us were saying yes, and Paul was advancing the rather strong proposition that no, because it's incompatible with the level of technological sophistication necessary to accomplish.
Yeah, I still stipulate that.
I personally highly doubt it. If there was anybody that was going to do that, it would be us going someplace else. And what's the name of the audiobook I've got is Phoebus, something like that. Anyway, they go into another star to colonize, and they take the bishops or the cardinals or whatever with them, and
for
it
an
would be us
atheist,
doing it to somebody else. It wouldn't be somebody coming to you.
For an atheist, you have a rather religious view of man as fallen, and
it really, I'm really
unsalvageable.
Bugs me. It really bugs me. I mean, I was raised a Roman Catholic, but I was an atheist since I was like.
I would argue that any pure species that evolves on a planetary surface as a result of natural selection would be subject to the same same peer selection pressures, similar selection pressures, which would mean that there would be a great premium there would be a preference for false positives over false negatives, because false negatives can get you killed. So what evolutionary psychologists would call the agency detector would be overactive in any intelligent species. So they would have the same, more or less the same set of evolutionary motivations to develop something very approximately like the range of religions we see on Earth. So, and given that almost all, if not all, early civilizations had religion as their template for social organization that allowed them to unify and progress and create the civilization we have today, I don't see any incompatibility whatsoever between a very high technology civilization, even a cosmological scale civilization, colonizing its home galaxy, also being motivated by something that we would be likely to call religion if we encountered it.
Well, it's a rather strong proposition. Like, I mean, it sort of sounds plausible when you say it, but I'll be more convinced if we figure out that elephants and dolphins and whales have an active religious internal life. because that strikes me as sort of a
or proto religious life. You know,
Right.
they're not at our level of cognition. They're smart, and they've got the neocortex and they've got mammalian brains and.
But that agency detector pathway that you proposed certainly would generalize to those contexts, it seems to me. And so,
Well, I mean, elephants bury their
Yeah, but if you have an extremely advanced technology, I mean, even way beyond where we are, you have to have a very, very tightly coherent relationship with reality.
right.
You can't.
And I would suggest to you that there are some forms of Hinduism and some form of Buddhism that have no problem whatsoever with that kind of relationship to reality, although they interpret it radically differently from the way Westerners do.
Yeah, maybe, but
Hindus never had the problem.
Even tighter than that.
Hindus never had the problem with Darwinism that we had because they've got Hanuman, which is a monkey god. I mean, they don't think it's a horrible thing to be descended. They think it's a divine thing to be descended from a monkey god. So you've got a very different cultural experience. And I'm not arguing for a robust cultural relativism, as I just argued in relationship to the agency detector and natural selection. I think we can follow evolutionary history in a pretty clear way. But still, there are radically different interpretations of human experience.
Well, it might be possible to tell a story about human experience that would have some fantastical elements, but I think ultimately that coherence has to be so tight that it's always got to come back to you can never get to where that runs away and becomes an end in itself, which is what happens with human religions.
It supplies the end for which people strive. Science is a means. It's for some people it's a means for knowledge, but for more people it's just a means for a comfortable life, or a means for technological development, or a means for industrializing your nation state. So science can be a means toward proselytizing your religion just as much as it can be a means for financialization of your economy or industrialization.
I don't see how science could be a.
Well, I think what we're seeing now, and we're seeing more and more. I mean, it used to be that science was only the province of the elite, but I think that's turning around now. With an increased degree of specialization, where you need a lot more people involved in science, the science is becoming a way of addressing our reality. It's not just a means to an end. I
didn't say it's just a means to an end. I said it is a means to an end, among other things.
I mean, the means is engineering, not science, right?
I see science as a lot of things, but I don't see it as a means to proselytize religion.
Well, yeah, I mean,
every televangelist who uses a television camera is using scientifically derived technology as a means for proselytizing their message.
Yeah, but that's not what I mean. I mean,
that's using the tools that science gave him to deny science itself, and the fool doesn't realize that he's actually using science to do it. But I wouldn't say science itself is not the means; it's the tools that science gave him.
I mean, I could be wrong, but I still feel that if you can advance to the point where you can extract orders of magnitude more free energy for your environment than we can now, then you're going to have and not even be biological at that point, but you're going to have such a coherent relationship with reality that you can't have a story that runs away and becomes an end in itself, which is
your smartphone has to have a coherent relationship with reality. You just have to interact with it,
So, well, let me ask another question.
Okay.
Oh, hold on. My phone is ringing. Let me mute myself.
Okay. Well, I mean, I admit that that's a conjecture. It's not a hard, because we don't have any examples, I can't empirically verify it. I mean,
well, we've got the Vulcans. They're definitely Jewish, right?
yeah.
And those,
And,
the Klingons are some sort of crazy xenocidal conquering.
no, I understand Vulcan food's actually pretty good, so they can't be Jews.
Well, they're vegetarians, so.
Yeah, they're more like samurai, but
Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to fall on the side with Paul and say, the more advanced you are, to me, the less likely the religion will remain.
but I will admit that I could be wrong. My notion of what highly advanced means could be completely nonsensical,
Well,
because we don't know what that is. We haven't seen it.
Regardless, I agree with you. Because it's, it seems, at least with the humans, and the more intelligent we become, the less likely we are to believe in certain religious things.
Yeah. Well, one thing I've speculated about in my blog is that you could have a civilization that is not sophisticated intellectually, but has sort of inherited this technology from many, many generations ago, and they no longer really understand it, but it kind of self-sustains, and they could be easily victimized by mind viruses like religion.
So my
the
phone
cargo cult science.
Now you're talking Anne McCaffrey, the Pern series.
Oh, there you go. Well, if it's in science fiction, it must be true.
Well, because that's what happened to them. Hundreds of years passed, even 1,000 years actually passed, and they had lost their scientific knowledge.
Yeah.
There was the one last episode where they actually had a way to communicate with the past, because in the past is where they genetically engineered the damn the sand lizards, what do you call it, to become the dragons. So they had technology then, but over hundreds of years they had just gotten rid of all their technology. They left the spacecrafts out orbiting the damn planet, and they made a living in an old-fashioned way on the planet.
I think there's a lot of SF that's got that kind of premise.
Probably. It's the one I know.
Yeah, I mean, we lost the recipe, but we still have some of the artifacts.
Right.
And if those artifacts are enough to come in to cross interstellar distances and conquer another species, or even destroy them, then that would be a risk. That I could understand. There was a SF writer named Fred Saberhagen who wrote this series about the Berserkers, and they were some kind of semi-robotic species, kind of like Doctor Who's Daleks, who only existed for the purpose of annihilating other species.
Battlestar Galactica with the Cylons, right?
Yeah, it's just now how the economics of that works. I'm at a loss, but how they pay for all that stuff. But in fact, Sam's taken off of it. We were talking about Andy Weir's new book, Artemis. And in a recent interview I heard with him, he was talking about how almost all science fiction gets economics wrong. And he was trying his best in this new book to get his economics at least plausible. I mean,
Star Trek tried it. They say we don't need money anymore, and all this other stuff, and all this.
Well, Star Trek made references, but they didn't develop any theory. I've had people ask me, "Well, how did the Star Trek Society function?" I said, "I have no idea. They just said they had no money. That doesn't mean it's workable."
Well,
No, but
they all wear uniforms, and
they're
they're members of the military. We don't get to see the other people, right?
What I'm saying is they've actually said it a number of times in many episodes where we don't need money anymore.
Which is a complete bollocks, of course.
Then you get to Deep Space.
They mentioned.
Wait. Then you get to Deep Space Nine, and here you have the Ferengi talking about gold-plated latinum.
Yeah, I think the Ferengi have gotten a bad rap. They were actually a lot more realistic than anything else.
But I mean, just smashed through the premise of the Federation having no money. It just smashed right through because they started to deal with money after that.
Right, and I think actually it was an improvement in Star Trek because they introduced this species that was interested in profit and money, and
It was more plausible.
it was a lot more plausible. And instead of but they treated the Ferengi as inferior
Unpleasant.
for that unpleasant and inferior for that reason. Although they did eventually develop some sympathetic Ferengi characters, but the notion that you had to have that you could have this just society where anybody can have what they want just by asking for it, because why? Sort of, that the middle step was missing.
There's something wrong. Yeah.
There's always something.
Well, any development of the idea was missing. I mean, all it was an assertion. There was never any indication of how the economy was supposed to function without.
And I think it's just basically Gene Roddenberry didn't care about that. That wasn't something he was interested in, and he was going to have his utopia. Damn it, and so. But and I think real societies will always have some resource that is not unlimited, and maybe at some point food and healthcare and housing will become effectively unlimited, and you can have them just for the asking because nobody cares. You take what you want, right? But there's always something.
Well, there are luxury goods, and if you create an economy where anybody can have an Armani suit or anybody can wear a Ferrari, anybody can drive a Ferrari, then those goods become meaningless. They have to be, in order for them to have the value that they have to be limited in production. Well, it would be naive to think that that's going to go away.
Things have value for other reasons, though. I mean,
well, yeah, but one of the reasons you don't pay several $1,000s for a Coach handbag because of its great workmanship. You pay for the name.
Well, sure, but who does? I mean, I frankly don't know anybody who does that.
Well, there are many people who do.
Yeah, and who cares? I mean, the vast majority of our economy is not that. It's other things.
Well, actually, a big chunk of the economy is that. If you read the Financial Times, I mean, they have a regular supplement when they talk about luxury goods and how big of a market it is. I mean, it's a big profit earner for some companies.
Yeah, but I mean, let's face it. I mean, you look at where the big chunks of the economy are. They're not there, and I think that will slowly shift and change over time. But I think what's really the notion is if you get to a situation where you can do anything you want without limitation, without constraint, then you're essentially godlike, and you don't need anything from anybody else. Fine. But I really don't see that ever happening. There's always going to be some constraints, some resources that are finite.
Yeah, I mean, they go to this fancy little or just this sweet little diner or restaurant. Who's there running the restaurant? Who's actually doing this? Why are they doing it? Just to serve you? I mean, it was just a poor concept. It wasn't well done. Gene Roddenberry kind of missed the boat on that one.
Yeah, I think he did.
Later it broke.
Yeah, and I think Deep Space Nine tried to bring some of that in a little bit, actually.
Well, yeah, Deep Space Nine was all about the promenade deck and different businesses, including Quark's bar.
But I mean, essentially, most of Star Trek is essentially a naval drama. It's these ships in space that are run under a tight military hierarchy, and so they don't really have to care about how society at large is organized. But I think it's a lot more interesting to read science fiction that's where they like Andrew Weir did, really try to make things, the economics at least be plausible, at least make sense. It may not be right, but it may.
Heinlein tried to make it make.
Yeah, he did.
I mean, to build the ships, you have to have the workers to do it, or the machines, and to build the machines that build the ships, you have to have the materials, and to get the materials, you have to have the miners, et cetera, so forth and so on. Somewhere along the line, if you get the people together, you're going to have to give them, you have to feed them, you have to house them, you have to give them some kind of payment. Even if it's not money, you have to be able to.
Unless they're motivated by something like a religious belief.
Yeah, but you have to eat. They have to.
Yeah. But the other people who were motivated by the same belief could if you have an enormous cult and some people farm to create food for everybody, and other people do other things,
like the construction of the pyramids, which was probably nearly all volunteer labor, and was people that were there as a religious duty, and it was organized religiously because the king had to have a huge tomb, and you see that in a lot of cultures. The Egyptians really took it to the extreme, but
I mentioned that in my talk at the Starship Congress in Monterey. I use the Egyptian examples because their religious life and their economic life was so tightly coupled that temples often served as grain storage depots.
Yeah, and there's lots of other examples of religious institutions being entwined with other parts of society, and of course, religion institutions being incredibly corrupt as well, and making themselves rich. But I guess what the whole point we were trying to get at was, how universal is this? Even on Earth, the religions that want to propagate themselves aren't universal, but you do have these religions that crop up from time to time that want to control not only their region, but they want to control everyone. Christianity probably is the deepest example of that, where they want to go all over the world and convert everyone. Islam is also more or less along those lines. So, it's the question I have is that the thing we have to fear, or is there something else if we advertise our presence to the universe? Hello, Sam. You back?
Hi. Sorry.
Well, let me ask you the question, Paul, that I was beginning to ask when my phone rang a few minutes ago, which is, you were making the claim that sufficiently advanced, technologically advanced, and scientifically advanced civilization would have to have a very tightly coupled relationship with reality, and that would imply that it excluded religious elements or mythological elements, however you want to phrase it. Would you go on to claim that there is only one such possible coherent relationship? There goes my phone again. Or that there are the possibility of several?
I don't know the answer to that question. I suspect there's only one, but I could be wrong. And there goes Nick's phone again. And another thing is, I'm not saying there would be no religion. I'm saying that religion that buds off and becomes an end in itself is far more unlikely, because of it would destroy that coherence. Even if there's more than one way to have that coherence, which I doubt that there is, but I'm willing to entertain other ideas. I mean,
yeah, I have a tendency to agree. It's
and the reason I say that is that it's really just my lack of imagination. I can't figure out another way it can work.
Well,
there could be two ways that wouldn't be isomorphic to each other.
As far as we're concerned, as far as humans are concerned, religion, particularly the Christian, the monogod, single god religions, or even the Zeuses and the what do you call it? Was a sort of a pre-scientific era where they were trying to figure out how things work. and they assigned gods or deities to everything that they didn't understand. So in a sense, it kind of sparked off science, and as we found out more things, less and less gods there were.
Yeah, I think it was an uneven level of progress, but yeah.
To the point where religion kept trying to enforce itself, which it's still doing, trying to strangle the science. But in the beginning, God did not create the heaven and the earth, but in the beginning, it was actually a sort of a pre-science.
I think, who was it? I think it was Epictetus who said that, yeah, the gods exist, but they have nothing to do with our everyday existence. They're not that interested in us. We're not interested in them. Which is one way of dealing with it.
Zeus was pretty interested in at least human women.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I get that. I've always been interested in human women.
Percy Jackson.
Although now that I'm a father of a 16-year-old, I'm more wary of that impulse. But
here's a question for Nick. And speaking of scientific civilizations and religion, do you think there's a tendency for civilizations whose central organizing project is something scientific in nature for that to evolve in a religious direction over time? So the example I'm thinking of is, a plausible story that people put forth for the near future of our solar system is that a Martian civilization would naturally gravitate towards terraforming as its organizing civilizational principle. And that's this type of project. It's a scientific enterprise fundamentally, but it's one which seems ripe for humans to religify, if you will. It's something about reifying.
Would a central project take on religious dimensions? Can we phrase it that way?
Yeah, perhaps inevitably, or perhaps inevitably for humans. Yeah.
I would say that probably is a tendency. There, many scholars have argued that the great ideologies of the 20th century, fascism and communism, and to a lesser extent nationalism, were surrogate religions. That is to say, they had all the features of religion, but they were secular ideologies, but they served the same function in society and for individuals that religion serves.
Or the United States and Russia both had forms of manifest destiny as organizing projects during the 19th century. And even the phraseology itself is religious in flavor, right?
Yeah, and that but I think in terms of Mars, we're probably going to Marsify ourselves more than we would terraform Mars.
Marsify? Is that what you said?
Yes. Well, it's a lot easier to change our genome than it is to change the planet's climate.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Although I think it'll be more of a meeting in the middle sort of situation.
Oh yeah, I agree with that.
There will also likely be human purists who focus on keeping the human genome as close to its present state as possible, and they will actively resist changing.
They have no chance of success. I don't think I mean, it changes all the time anyway.
It does. We know that from the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. You can demonstrate that there's always going to be gene flow. However, that being said, acknowledging the possibility of pretty significant augmentation, being healthier, smarter, longer lived, and things like that, I think there will still be an ideological humanism in the future that will focus on keeping human beings part of the mix as much as human as possible.
I read that somewhere. There was either a science fiction or a science.
Yeah, but it's short of extremely draconian measures. There's no way to stop it.
Well, I was about to say, there's going to be people out there who are going to, be against going to Mars simply because that they know that we will change rather quickly because of the environment.
If evolution is allowed to function.
Well, not just evolution, right, but genetic engineering.
Just imagine Earth and Mars got in a war, and for 1,000 years,
right,
they were cut off from each other. then you could see a nascent speciation start even in 1,000 years. I think.
I'm saying the first baby born.
That's how speciation happens, is geographic isolation, right?
Yeah,
well, that's allopatric speciation.
But then if contact were reestablished, it seems inevitable that there'd be some sort of racism, speciesism at play that would.
I'm trying to say, if I can finish, the first baby born is going to be either slightly or even noticeably different if it was born on another planet like Mars.
No, maybe not. It's not Lamarckian, right?
More significantly, the different ones will live, and the other ones will die at a differential rate. And the differential survival and differential reproduction is what's going to drive speciation. So if human beings live on Mars subject to different selection pressures, yes, they will speciate, absolutely.
I think it's going to come down to women who can give birth successfully at Mars to healthy babies, rather than, it won't.
And continue for a few generations. It would not take long for that to result in. It's going to be a highly selective process.
Yeah, it's a big question mark, the issue of gestation and lower gravity. Like, obviously, people have raised a lot of questions about how big a deal it is, but nobody knows, right? I mean,
and the way to find out is to do it, which is, 1/3. You have a 1/3 Earth gravity at Mars, so.
It's not just the gravity, the big picture of it, but it's also the temporarily speaking, if they're going to terraform it. But
although, is it really true that
the artificial environment, the specific amount of oxygen in the air, the specific amount of gases that they put in their
well, that will have to be artificial in their early days.
So I'm saying the whole artificial thing is going to be an environment, selective environment. Not just the gravity, although the gravity is a big part of it.
Well, the gravity we can't do much about. That's going to be what it is.
Right.
If an astronaut got pregnant on the ISS, would NASA make them come back down immediately? Culture of risk aversion and all that?
Well, you wouldn't know. Well, NASA probably would, but it typically takes a couple of months to know that you're pregnant.
Before they would even notice necessarily. But
when you miss your period, if you're young enough to have a regular period, and you miss it, then yeah. But
right, but maybe I don't know how actively NASA monitors various, if they take regular urine tests or other.
I don't think they do that.
Blood work.
They kind of count on astronauts being highly disciplined, So
then, it seems. Do you think no astronaut has gotten pregnant on the ISS?
I doubt it. I really doubt it. There was only one couple that's ever been in space, and that was on the shuttle, not on the ISS. And they were only up for like 10 days. So ostensibly they were told, "Don't you dare! Don't even think about it."
And if they
just went up anyway.
We have cameras.
The opportunity was there.
Yeah. But cameras can fail.
If they did, you would unlikely know about it. It would be kept secret just by the people themselves, the astronauts themselves, that would keep it.
I'm just saying, optimistically, we could learn one of these days that pregnancy works perfectly fine in low gravity, and then
they're going to have to.
There'll be no.
Well, in 1/3 gravity, I'd be pretty optimistic that it would work okay. In zero gravity, I don't know. It's a crapshoot.
I don't know if you realize this, but the people who are insisting on going to Mars and colonize it are thinking about that. They have to. In fact, part of their training and test series is about the compatibility of personalities. And sex is one of the things that they have to take into account. We're talking.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but when it comes to these medical questions, there's just no data, right? Nobody knows.
Right.
That's right.
I mean, the earliest crews you could sterilize, right? And they would make that a requirement that all the men have vasectomies.
Speaking of draconian, that's a pretty.
Well, I mean, a lot of guys have vasectomies voluntarily, right? I mean.
Yeah, no, it's possible they could make a requirement, but
you don't have to sterilize the women, just the men.
Or vice versa. You don't have to sterilize the men if you sterilize the women.
Well, the problem is, or just send people that are older, that are postmenopausal. which I think
Or
is
maybe
actually a good
or maybe
idea
the
because you
radiation environment will sterilize everybody, and it's no problem.
probably not.
Which has been suggested. Kim Holder, in her presentation to the Starship Congress in Monterey, she talked about sending older people to a moon colony.
Well, I mean, especially if you think that the risks are very high, it's like John Scalzi's Old Man's War, right? They sent people who are already in their late 70s to fight. They gave them new bodies, but they were elderly people.
If you send all the old people, you solve Social Security too, which is that's a plus.
That was kind of Scalzi's thing. Is you get a new body, you get to which is going to be awesome, and but you have to go fight, and it turns out like half of them get killed, so there's a lot of risk. But you're going to die. You're going to die in 10 years anyway, so why not? So but that the notion, the main problem with sending older people, of course, is they're just not as fit, right?
Hence the new body. So we just got to master that.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I turned 60 in about 9 weeks, so I'm ready for a new body. Trust me.
I'm not too far behind you.
Okay, well, you know what? We've been we never did solve all the problems in METI tonight, but we have been on the air for about 90 minutes. So let me just briefly check. Is there? Can anybody check if there's any questions or comments? Let's see. Where are we on the? Oh, we have no viewers. Okay.
Okay.
Now, when we had Eva Bodman on in a few episodes back, we actually had like 3 or 4 viewers, and like a couple of them asked questions. It was great. I want that to happen more as we go along. Anyway, so I guess we're going to wrap it up. I will give each of you one last chance for some final thoughts, and you can say whatever you want. So let's start. Let's go from left to right on my screen with Nick Nielsen.
I wish I had a bunch of things that I had meant to bring up, but I'd forgotten them all. So I'm plumb out of final observations. Although I will repeat that since we spent so much time talking about religion, I would urge listeners to listen to or watch John Romer's documentary Testament.
John Romer. Okay, I'm writing that down. We'll get that in the show notes.
Romer. John Romer.
Okay. Patrick, what about you?
Well, I could perhaps wrap up the beginning question about METI. I for the people who are out there who are afraid of invading aliens, I would say don't even worry about it, because I don't think that's ever going to happen. I don't think even if they were there, I don't see it, as a problem. If you send them a signal, they're not going to get insulted over the music. They might think we're crazy, but if they were going to invade, they would have done it long ago.
Okay. Sam?
My only thought is that it depends what music we send,
That's a good thought. They might be like us and be highly biased towards certain kinds of music. Okay. We'll wrap up there. And there will be show notes at unseenpodcast.com. Please go there. We'll have links to all the stuff that we've talked about. I should say all the stuff. Many of the things we've talked about tonight, we will have links to. If you have questions or comments that are not satisfied by the show notes, feel free to ask them. There will be a comment section on the blog at unseenpodcast.com. Just type it in there. I'll try to answer it. If I can't answer it, I'll find someone who will. And also, please check out my interview with Doug Vakoch on the Wow Signal podcast. That's wowsignalpodcast.com. Please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast aggregation service is, and leave us a review on iTunes or, again, whatever service you use. Now there's quite a large diversity. Not everybody's on iTunes, but we'd like to hear from you. You can always email unseenpodcast@gmail.com, and there's lots of other ways you can get in touch with us. Just go to unseenpodcast.com. There's a lot of information there about how you can get in touch. You can participate in one of these panels. It's not strictly limited to Nick Nielsen and friends. It may appear like that, but there are, anybody can be on the panel. You have to come over to our community, introduce yourself, engage in the discussion about what the episode should look like, and then if you do that, you can be on the panel. And so it's really not that demanding. You don't have to be an audio engineer, although in some cases it might help.
You do need a working microphone.
You need a working microphone, apparently. Gosh, sorry about Ken Wiesen. I'm sympathetic to his plight today. And anyway, so that's it. This has been episode 84 of the Unseen Podcast. It is still, it was the 8th of December until about a minute ago, here on the East Coast of the United States. And we will see you in January. This is the last episode of 2017. The next one will be in January, and where we'll resume our normal schedule after the holidays. And the subject for that episode is not at all settled on, so feel free to come on over to the community and weigh in on what that should be, even if you don't want to be on the panel. Okay, so thank you, Nick and Patrick and Sam, and good night.